There are some conversations between a mother and her son that never really leave her. Years may pass, seasons may change. The little boy she once held in her arms may become a grown man with a life of his own. But certain words remain exactly where he left them, somewhere deep inside her heart. I remember one evening when my son and I were sitting together, not doing anything particularly important. There was no celebration, no special occasion, no reason for the conversation that was about to happen. We were simply sitting quietly, sharing the kind of silence that only two people who have known each other for a lifetime can share. I looked at him and realized how much he had changed. The boy who once ran into my arms after falling in the garden was now a man who carried his disappointments quietly. The child who used to ask me why the moon followed our car had grown into someone who had learned that life does not always give simple answers. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then I smiled and asked him something I had wondered about for years. "Tell me something," I said softly. "When you think about the woman you might one day marry, what do you want her to be like?" He looked at me. For a moment, I thought he might laugh and change the subject. Instead, he became quiet. That was how I knew my question had touched something deeper than I expected. He leaned back, looked toward the window, and took a slow breath. "Mom," he said, "I don't think I want someone perfect." Those words surprised me. I smiled. "What do you want then?" He looked at me again. "I want someone real." I remember those words because they told me more about my son than any long conversation could have. He wasn't talking about beauty. He wasn't talking about money. He wasn't talking about status, popularity, or the kind of things people often believe make a relationship successful. He was talking about a heart. He wanted a woman who could be herself without pretending, a woman who could laugh freely, cry honestly, apologize sincerely, and love without turning love into a competition. As I listened, I realized that my son had learned something I had tried to teach him since he was a little boy. Love is not about finding someone who never hurts you. Love is about finding someone who cares enough to understand your heart when you are hurting. He told me that he wanted his future wife to be kind, not the kind of kindness people perform when others are watching. He meant the quiet kind. The kind that helps an exhausted person without announcing it. The kind that remembers how someone takes their coffee. The kind that notices when a person becomes unusually quiet. The kind that stays gentle even when nobody is there to praise her. I looked at my son as he spoke, and suddenly I remembered him as a little boy. He was perhaps 8 years old when I found him sitting beside an injured bird in our yard. He had wrapped the little creature carefully in a piece of cloth and was sitting beside it as though his presence alone could protect it. "Why are you still sitting here?" I had asked him. He looked up at me. "Because it's scared." I remember smiling. "You're scared too," I told him. He nodded. "But I don't want it to be scared alone." That was my son. Even as a child, he understood something many adults spend their entire lives learning. Sometimes love simply means refusing to let someone suffer alone. Years later, when he spoke about the woman he hoped to marry, I heard that same little boy in his voice. He wanted a woman who would not run away from difficult days. He wanted someone who understood that every person carries invisible wounds. He wanted someone who could sit beside him during a difficult night without needing to fix everything. And perhaps that was because my son had known his own difficult night. There were moments in his life when heartbreak changed him. I watched him go through disappointments that he rarely discussed. There were times when he would come home quieter than usual. I would ask, "Are you all right?" And he would give me that familiar smile mothers recognize immediately. "Yes, Mom, I'm fine." But mothers know. We hear the sadness behind the word fine. We notice when our children's laughter becomes slightly different. We notice when they stop telling us things. And there were nights when I wanted to ask him everything, but I knew that sometimes love means knowing when to speak and when to simply remain nearby. One evening, after a painful chapter in his life, he finally sat beside me. He didn't say much. He simply stared at the floor. After a long silence, he whispered, "Maybe I wasn't enough." Those words broke something inside me. I reached for his hand. "Never say that again," I told him. He looked at me. I said, "Someone leaving your life does not determine your worth." He didn't answer, so I continued. "You cannot measure your value by the person who chose not to stay." He looked away, and I could see tears gathering in his eyes. That night, I understood that my son wasn't afraid of love. He was afraid of giving his heart to someone who would not understand how carefully he had learned to protect it. Years later, when he told me what he wanted in his future wife, I realized that his heartbreak had not made him bitter. It had made him wiser. He didn't want revenge against the past. He wanted peace in the future. He told me he wanted a woman who could communicate. "A woman who tells me when something is wrong," he said. I laughed softly. "Even when you're the one who caused it?" He smiled. "Especially then." That answer made me proud, because love cannot survive on silence. Two people can sit in the same room for years and still become strangers if they stop telling each other what is happening inside their hearts. My son understood that. He wanted a woman who could say, "That hurt me," instead of pretending nothing happened. A woman who could say, "I was wrong," without feeling defeated. A woman who could say, "I need you," without feeling weak. And he wanted to be that kind of man for her, too. That mattered to me. Because marriage isn't about one person demanding perfection from another. It is two imperfect people choosing to protect something beautiful together. I asked him one question. "What about beauty?" He smiled. "Of course I want to be attracted to her." I laughed. "But that isn't what makes someone beautiful forever." Then he became serious. "Mom, I want to look at her when we're both old and still recognize the girl I fell in love with. Not because she hasn't changed, but because her heart is still familiar." I didn't know what to say. Sometimes your child says something that makes you forget he is your child. For a moment, he becomes a man standing in front of you, carrying his own understanding of life. I looked at him and thought about all the years between the little boy and the man sitting beside me. I remembered his first day of school. I remembered the scraped knees, the forgotten lunches, the late-night conversations, the dreams he once had as a child, the mistakes, the victories, the disappointments, the moments when he believed he knew everything, and the moments when life gently taught him how little any of us truly know. I realized that the woman he would eventually choose would not simply become his wife. She would become part of all those memories. She would meet the man created by every experience that came before her. She would meet the child who once needed his mother's hand. She would meet the young man who had experienced heartbreak. She would meet the adult who had learned to forgive. And I hoped she would understand that. I hoped she would never look at his quietness and mistake it for indifference. Because my son has always felt more than he says. He is not someone who gives his heart away carelessly. When he loves, he pays attention. He remembers. He notices. He worries. He protects. And sometimes, I think that is why he needs someone who understands the language of quiet love. Someone who knows that, "Did you get home safely?" can mean, I love you. Someone who understands that sitting beside someone in silence can sometimes be more intimate than 1,000 words. He told me he wanted a woman who would respect his dreams. I told him that was important. But then I added, "And you must respect hers." He smiled. I know. I hope he always remembers that. A future wife should never have to disappear inside her husband's life. She should have dreams of her own, places she wants to see, things she wants to learn, goals that make her eyes light up. And my son should not merely stand beside her, he should cheer for her. He should be proud of her. He should want to see her become everything she was meant to become. Because real love doesn't make a person's world smaller, it makes their world bigger. He told me he wanted someone who could laugh with him. That made me smile. Because life can become heavy. There will be bills, responsibilities, disappointments, misunderstandings, sickness, aging, and days when everything seems to go wrong. On those days, sometimes the greatest gift two people can give each other is laughter. Not because their problems aren't real, but because they refuse to let their problems steal every beautiful moment. I imagined my son someday coming home tired, finding the woman he loves waiting for him, and hearing her laugh from another room. I imagined him stopping for a moment simply because the sound made him feel at home. That is what I want for him. Not a perfect marriage, a real one. A marriage where two people can have difficult conversations and still hold hands afterward. Where apologies are not humiliations. Where forgiveness is not weakness. Where loyalty isn't something they talk about, but something they live. I asked him, "What happens when you disagree?" He smiled. "We'll figure it out." I said, "That's your entire answer?" He nodded. "That's the point, Mum. We'll figure it out together." I looked at him and felt tears in my eyes. Because that was all I had ever wanted for my son. Not someone who promised never to disappoint him. Someone who promised not to abandon him whenever disappointment came. There is a difference. Love isn't proven when everything is easy. It is proven when two people are tired, confused, hurt, or afraid, and still decide that the person beside them is worth understanding. My son also told me something I will never forget. I want her to feel safe with me. That sentence stayed with me, because safety is one of the most beautiful forms of love. I don't mean a life without problems, I mean emotional safety. The ability to speak without fear, to cry without embarrassment, to make mistakes without being humiliated, to admit fear without being mocked, to be vulnerable without wondering whether your weakness will someday be used against you. I wanted my son to understand that being a good husband would not simply mean providing things. It would mean providing peace. A place where his future wife could put down the weight she carried all day and simply breathe. And I wanted her to give him that same peace, because my son deserves somewhere to rest too. Sometimes people forget that men need tenderness. They expect men to be strong every day. They tell them to hide their sadness, to swallow their fears, to keep moving. But I know my son. I know there are moments when he needs someone to look into his eyes and say, "You don't have to be strong right now. I'm here." I hope his future wife will be that person, and I hope he will be that person for her. Because love should not be a place where one person constantly carries the other. It should be a place where they take turns carrying each other. There will be days when she is stronger. There will be days when he is stronger. And there will be days when neither of them feels strong at all. On those days, I hope they remember why they chose each other. I hope they remember the beginning. I hope they remember the little things. The first conversation, the first laugh, the first time one of them realized, This person feels like home. Because years later, when life becomes ordinary, those small memories become precious. A cup of coffee, a hand held across a table, a message sent during a difficult day, a quiet drive, a shared joke nobody else understands. These are the things that become the architecture of a life together. My son doesn't need a woman who promises him a fairy tale. He needs someone willing to build a home with him, brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. And he must do the same. I told him that love is not simply about finding the right woman. It is also about becoming the right man. He listened. So I said, if you want a woman who is loyal, you must be loyal. If you want honesty, you must be honest. If you want patience, you must learn patience. If you want kindness, you must practice kindness even when you're angry. He nodded quietly. That is one of the most important things I hope he remembers. We cannot demand from another person what we refuse to become ourselves. If my son wants a woman who respects his heart, he must respect hers. If he wants her to listen, he must listen. If he wants her to forgive him, he must learn how to forgive. If he wants her to stay during his storms, he must be willing to stand beside her during hers. That is love. Not perfection. Reciprocity, commitment, grace, and patience. I don't know who she will be. I don't know what her voice will sound like. I don't know what her favorite song will be. I don't know what she will laugh about when she is nervous. I don't know what her childhood was like. I don't know what wounds she will carry. But when she eventually enters my son's life, I hope she understands something. She will not be expected to be perfect. She will simply be loved. And I hope she allows my son to be imperfect too. Because he will make mistakes. He will sometimes misunderstand. He will have difficult days. He will become quiet. He will occasionally forget something important. He will not always know the right thing to say. But I hope she sees his heart beneath those mistakes. And I hope he sees hers. Because two people cannot build a lifetime together if they are constantly keeping score. At some point, love requires them to put the scoreboard away and ask a more important question. How can we make this better? That is the question I want my son to carry into his marriage. Not who is right, but how do we heal? Not who won, but how do we protect us? Not, why did you do this to me? But what happened inside you? Those questions can save relationships. They can turn anger into understanding. They can turn distance into closeness. They can turn two wounded people into two people who know how to care for one another. And if my son ever finds that kind of love, I will not ask whether she is perfect. I will watch how she looks at him. I will watch how he looks at her. I will notice whether they listen to each other, whether they laugh, whether they make room for each other's dreams, whether they are gentle when nobody is watching. Because that is where love reveals itself. Not in photographs, not in grand announcements, not in beautiful words, but in ordinary moments. In the kitchen, in the car, during an argument, when one person is sick, when money is tight, when plans change, when life becomes difficult. That is where I will see whether they truly love each other. And if one day my son comes to me and says, "Mom, I found her," I think I will know what he means. He won't mean that he found the most beautiful woman in the world. He will mean that he found someone whose presence makes him want to become a better man. Someone who makes him feel understood. Someone whose happiness matters to him. Someone he can trust with his silence. Someone he can tell his fears. Someone whose hand he wants to hold, not just on the happiest day of his life, but on every ordinary day afterward. And when that day comes, I will probably cry. Not because I am losing my son. I could never lose him. A mother's love does not disappear when her child grows up. It simply learns how to stand farther away. It learns not to interfere. It learns to trust. It learns to watch quietly while the person she raised builds a life of his own. And perhaps the greatest gift I can give my son is not choosing his future wife for him. It is trusting him to recognize love when it arrives. I want him to remember everything life has taught him. I want him to remember the heartbreaks without becoming imprisoned by them. I want him to remember the people who left without believing that everyone will leave. I want him to remember his mistakes without allowing them to define him. And most of all, I want him to remain soft. Because the world will sometimes tell him that softness is weakness. I know better. A man who can remain kind after heartbreak is strong. A man who can forgive without forgetting his lessons is strong. A man who can love without controlling is strong. A man who can apologize without feeling smaller is strong. A man who can look at the woman he loves and say, "Tell me what you need," is strong. That is the man I hope my son becomes, and that is the kind of man I hope his future wife recognizes. Maybe one day, years from now, I will sit across from them at a dinner table. Maybe I will watch them tease each other. Maybe I will see him quietly move her glass closer because he knows she likes it there. Maybe she will reach across the table and touch his hand without even thinking about it. And perhaps, in that tiny gesture, I will understand that my son finally found what he was searching for. Not perfection. Home. A home made not from walls, but from trust. Not from possessions, but from memories. Not from promises spoken once, but from promises kept every ordinary day. And if she ever asks me what my son was like before she knew him, I will tell her stories. I will tell her about the little boy who sat beside an injured bird because he didn't want it to be frightened alone. I will tell her about the boy who used to hold my hand when he was afraid. I will tell her about the young man who experienced heartbreak and still chose kindness. I will tell her about the son who once sat beside me and confessed what he truly wanted in the woman he would someday love. And then I will tell her something else. I will tell her that he is still learning, just as she is, just as I am, just as every human being is. And I will ask her to be patient with him, not because he is fragile, but because every heart deserves patience. And I will ask my son to be patient with her too, because she will have her own history, her own fears, her own scars, her own days when she doesn't know how to explain what she feels. And perhaps that is the most beautiful thing about love. Two people don't come together because they have no wounds. They come together because they are willing to be gentle with each other's wounds. That night, when our conversation finally ended, my son stood up and walked toward the door. Before he left the room, he turned around. "Mum?" "Yes?" He smiled. "I think I know what I really want." I looked at him. "What?" He paused. "I want someone who chooses me, even when life isn't beautiful." My heart tightened. I smiled through the tears in my eyes. "Then, my son," I said, "when you find her, make sure you choose her the same way." He nodded, and then he walked away. I stayed there for a long time after.